This is Albert Chu, like he said, of OTOT, and I'm Jenny with Myers Collective.
Now it's my turn, apparently. Good morning. Thank you guys for coming. It's super early, so we really, really appreciate it. I think we're just going to talk about our individual processes and then come back together and talk about how our similar processes end up being a fun exploration for both of us, and that gets us out of our comfort zones. So with that... Is this on? Whoa, that is on. Okay, thank you. So, after working in architecture for several years, I started OTOT with a handful of fabric pieces. I made a series of oversized bags based on the archetypal tote, and I also made a series of more volumetric sculptural pieces. And all of these are supposed to be fun and a little bit minimalist, a little bit absurd, and they could be used in multiple configurations. Now, they don't necessarily look minimal, but the idea is that OTOT always has this fundamental way of thinking, which is how can we make objects where every part is essential? So, for OTOT, the goal is to make pieces that look simple and minimalist in aesthetic, but as we all probably know, it's actually kind of hard to get there. And that's where I think OTOT has a lot of fun. Experimenting through iterations, perfecting construction and details, and perhaps most importantly, working hard to hide the effort so that the final results have a grace and an ease about them. So for me, the Ninja pouch, which is shown here, was a huge breakthrough in the process. I was getting increasingly fascinated with the archetype, the simple pouch that my mom taught me how to make when I was 8 years old. I think mostly as a way to distract me from bothering her and saying, like, what's going on? What do I do for the summer? So she taught me how to make a simple pouch, which is, you take a rectangle, you make 2 stitches, and you flip it inside out, and you have a pouch. Let's just say that it was really successful because by the end of the summer, I had pouches for everything, like books, notebooks, pens, pencils, stuffed animals, Game Boys, Game Boy cartridges. I think there are pouches for pouches. So obviously I had a lot of fun doing that. So coming back to, I guess, a few years ago, one night I happened to think about these simple pouches and, was reminiscing about the golden years of childhood. And I thought, hey, would it be really fun to do something with the simple pouch again in the context of OTOT? Ultimately, I did just that. I took a very long rectangle, and instead of folding it in half to have a basic simple pouch, I folded it into thirds, and I sewed 1/3, kind of unfolded it, sewed another third, and then flipped it again and sewed it the last third. And what you get is a tri-star shape, where it's the image on the right, where you get one leg, which acts as the opening to access 2 other slots. And I thought this was actually really fun. I mean, it's a super simple idea, and thought it'd be really easy just to perfect and, get it done. But obviously, I was wrong. Otherwise, this lecture would be over. So especially as the Ninja pouch transitioned from fabric to leather, I continued to work on the Ninja, and it became the transition point for OTOT from fabric pieces to leather. And for the Ninja, it was interesting because, with fabric, you can basically stitch things, unstitch it, rework it, make it really simple. And it's a really flexible, forgiving material. But with leather, it's obviously a totally different beast. That was a bad pun. So leather has a lot of memory, right? So if you punch it, if you cut it, if you stitch it, if you hammer it, if you skive it, if you thin it, it will be there forever. And so when coming back to the Ninja, it was really important to kind of take these material properties into account. And that's where it became really fun to try to make this object super minimal because the construction and the details became incredibly important. I mean, as a result, I don't know if you can tell here, but as a result, all the stitching was on the interior. All the edges were actually slightly curved so that when it falls flat and straight. All the edges ended up looking straight. And, the opening ended up being turned so there was no exterior stitching, there was a hidden magnetic closure, and the idea was that all the work was turned onto the interior, so that the exterior ended up being super simple, super minimal, and it just was kind of free of kind of distraction and effort, at least in look. So hiding all of this was really important because then at the end of the day, you can just focus on having fun with the piece. It's just a simple pouch, right? So it ended up, to me, being really interesting because it looks like a basic pouch from the front with a basic flap, right? But then from the side, it starts to have a little bit more character. And in addition, it becomes super functional because you could have compartments in a basic pouch. And you can wear it as a hat. I have a fascination with hats. One day, I'll make one. So, you know, in general, OTAT is about finding that line where minimalism isn't just boring. It isn't about absence or, you know, stripping things to the very basics without any thought. For this case, this is a Toby bag, and the premise of the bag was, okay, can we have a bag that you can use horizontally as well as vertically? And what resulted was a box bag with an all-around two-way zipper. I don't know if you can tell, but it's an all-around two-way zipper that can be opened up and lay completely flat, and you can wear it as a T-shape, apparently, and as an apron. But the idea was that the top flap could then end up being opened, and you can use it as a vertical or horizontal bag. And again, it became all about the construction and the detail. And so the zipper actually turns multiple axes, which if you guys know, it ends up being really important to get the dimensions kind of equal so the zipper doesn't catch, and twisting around these axes gets a little bit complicated. But, you know, this process, minimizing the result by streamlining the actual construction and design through an extensive iterative process, which is how we did this, is not about the absence and stripping of everything, and it's not about getting rid of the personality and character. It's actually about having a little bit of fun. So hopefully, OTAT achieves a minimalist aesthetic with a little bit of a wink and a nudge, because in this case, I mean, why not have 4 sets of handles, right? And I think OTAT is about trying to find a little bit of play in the minimalist aesthetic, and we also make leather party hats.
Hi. We'll come back together at the end. Again, I'm Jenny Myers with Myers Collective. I do primarily jewelry in my collections now, hoping to eventually get into furniture design and home accessories that will kind of give more breadth to the collections, and also working with Albert on some collaborations. And I decided to start with these slides because I feel like I can't really talk about my work without talking about process. As Albert described, process is a huge part of getting to a minimalist aesthetic, and I'm not even sure if we classify ourselves as minimalists, but you guys can be the judge of that. Anyway, this is part of my studio wall at home, and on the left you see final prototypes. There are pieces that are in my line currently. I keep some samples at home, and some of the parts and components that go into making those. And then on the right, the other end of the wall, is some of the inspiration that goes into my work. And it's a collection of kind of random graphic designers' work, artists like on the bottom right, painting, some of the sketches that I've done and architectural studies that I've done, as well as some jewelry prototypes that will hopefully never see the light of day except in this context, I guess, and a picture of my niece and nephew. Anyway, so these are all an essential part of who I am and of my work, and I can't get to the image on the left without the image on the right. As some of you may know, I'm an architect by day, and I'm currently working with an awesome group of people at Loescher Meacham Architects. And I've had experience with Barbara Bester in LA, Clive Wilkinson Architects, and Bjarke Ingels in Copenhagen, among some others. And so during the day, I'm kind of designing residential, commercial, some civic buildings, creative office. And that's a very different experience, but also contributes to this work as well. But what you see here is more of my personal work from grad school and since, that, as you may be able to tell, is kind of a geometric study. It's more like taking a normative shape or figure and replicating it, duplicating it to create a larger mass or volume. And that's kind of an obsession of mine, as you'll see. But I think that this is kind of a very iterative process. It's about kind of aggregating these objects to achieve very interesting results, at least in my mind, of qualities of light, qualities of spatial experience, and hopefully in the end getting to something that's minimal but also very evocative. So these are kind of what's part of that process is for me zooming in and looking at a finer grain detail and how to develop these pieces in a more textural or kind of sensual way, I guess. And looking at how each piece is articulated and how they work together as a whole. And again, this is a very systematic approach, but it can get a little messy. And I feel like, again, this is something that's very essential to getting to kind of the heart of the matter. So then as jewelry came onto the scene, basically because architecture takes a long time to make, so I have always come home at the end of the day and made things, and whether it's clothing or objects. And I started kind of looking for things on the market to buy. I'm not a big jewelry wearer, ironically, so I was looking in the market for things that I really loved and was drawn to, and I couldn't find anything. I felt like I wanted something that made me feel beautiful but wasn't decorative. So I started experimenting with materials that I had around the house, actually, and some of it was industrial brass, which is what you see here. And I invested in some Japanese silk, and I started mixing the two. So one is very fine, refined draping silk, which is more feminine, and then the industrial brass, which is obviously more of a masculine and graphic aesthetic. So this is, again, another aggregation, basically, of the same module. They range in length from 1 inch to 6 inches on the long one. So what you then achieve is something that's very asymmetrical and that actually moves when you move. So it can create different configurations. And I feel like it kind of achieved what I was looking for in a piece. As the line has evolved, I've started looking at creating more open and closed polygonal figures. So on the image on the left, upper left, this is something that I've been playing with for a while, is this tension between kind of creating an object, a closed object, but also using the body to kind of create this confusion of how the object lays on the body. And then on the bottom, then starting to develop these closed shapes that aren't necessarily recognizable polygons, but as a collection, they create an interesting asymmetrical object as well. And then introducing points on the right that create a counterbalance, and again, kind of developing this idea of asymmetry. And then exploring new materials, at least new to me. On the right, quartz, which is completely invisible but also refracts light. So it's a very interesting, strange, at least to me, like the strange abstraction of jewelry. And on the left, then starting to study pieces that are for different parts of the body, not just necklaces. And then, again, going back to the simplest of elements, which is the polygon. But the way that these are constructed, they also move with the body, so they create like these shearing or skewing of an object that's readily recognizable, but also has a bit of a twist. So, and as you can see, I kind of do all the process myself on the computer and everything. So that's Myers Collective.
So as you guys can see, our processes are actually somewhat similar because we like to start with an idea and then start to pare it down to the very essentials. But even though our processes are quite similar, I think we come from very different points of departure. Yeah. And so for us, I think that's been a really fun, exciting, experience to get out of our own heads, work in areas and materials and ideas that we would not naturally gravitate towards. So we just decided one day, probably
over drinks,
as these are, as they happen to go,
Yes.
typically, that we wanted to do something together because we knew our processes were actually quite compatible. And so we wanted to make a series of objects, I think very utilitarian objects and very archetypal. I mean, you have a basic pouch that then becomes a wristlet. And we wanted to use it as a way to merge kind of the characteristics of both of our independent projects.
And I think also, as you saw in both of our work, to try to elevate something that's as humble as a pouch. I mean, I know a lot of people are doing elegant pouches now, but we were kind of thinking of it as a very utilitarian object that we could explore ways of kind of developing it and nurturing it in a way. No, we're taking it a little too seriously, but like kind of develop it to become something that's really actually very fun and colorful and can transition from like an accessory that you throw in your bag or something that you wear in the evening as something, you know, more of an elegant piece.
Yeah. And so I think we paid kind of lip service to both of our independent projects. I mean, for example, we have the wristlet part, the strap, that pays homage to Jenny's, I think, really beautiful jewelry work and her material qualities. And we also started working with leather. And
which pays homage to your really beautiful bags.
This is just going to be a really self-serving conversation. So. And so we just had a lot of fun getting into our mutual interests, which was exploring shapes and working with normative shapes and making them a little bit twisted and hopefully a little bit awkward, but hopefully super fun. So we worked with 3 basic shapes as a starting point. We had the square, the ellipse, and the circle, and this is what we did.
Yeah, we actually had a 4th that got booted, but but yeah, 3 shapes we skewed and basically sliced at a particular area that was actually very much a functional decision that we made, and then we added a strap at one end so that when they hung, they were hanging at kind of again, like a sort of a counterbalance angle when you're wearing it. So that was basically the evolution of the process.
Yeah, and I think that what was interesting is that we can bring both of our interests and I would say knowledge to make these pouches, wristlets, more refined, right? So the technical aspects of whether the leather falls flat, like how do we make the straight edge, how do we curve it, does the zipper work really well, and then also the wristlet where how thick does a brass tube have to be to accommodate this natural veg tan? But ultimately, it became a way for us to have fun, and it became sort of a playground for us. I mean, here's color, for example. Yeah. And we started one collection based on more classic, neutral color stories. We had silver, white, natural veg tan, navy, and pistachio, and then we ended up also making a collection that was more like a modernist technicolor, like more pop. But at the end of the day, we also wanted to make sure that it was super functional, that it could be a really useful, like Jenny was saying, something that you could just take around with you, go hands-free, go to a dinner party, go to a gallery opening, or just put it in your bag.
Right. And I think the color actually was an interesting exercise for us because we don't often work with very vibrant colors, and I think it was fun for one. Yeah. And
I think our wardrobes actually attest to that today.
It's really sad. Or really not this morning. No, but the color also, in a more intellectual way, kind of changes your perception of the piece. Like the piece is radically different when it's in a bright pop of yellow than it is in a silver or a muted veg tan. So that was fun also to experiment with, and I think we'll keep evolving that as we go forward. So.
Yeah. You want to go for the last slide? Go for it.
Do it together.
Thank you. We love you.
Thank you.